Hi, I'm here. How's it going, guys? Happy, what day of the week is it? Thursday. Happy Thursday. Um, Good morning, Oscar. I hope you're doing well. Morning streams are making an appearance again. I started my new job yesterday. It went really well. I'm really excited. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be a fun time. So yeah, we're doing that. And let me know if you can no longer hear the music. I want the music to just be like very softly in the back. And I'm sorry to everybody on YouTube who has been waiting for me. I know that it's difficult when I have to take like breaks and hiatuses in the middle of projects, and I'm sorry about that. So I know that the first two parts of this book have been up for a while, and I'm sorry that I'm just now getting to the third part, but I appreciate your kindness and support and patience while getting that up. So that being said, I'm drinking out of my Hairspray Broadway mug. Good morning, Baltimore. Even though I don't live in Baltimore, but I hope that Baltimore is also having a good morning. When I bend my fingers like this, it makes it look like I'm missing part of my hand, which is weird. Okay. I don't know. I feel like everything looks very odd today on me. Shall we jump in? Music's faint if you want to turn it up just a smidge. Okay. I'll smidge it up just a little bit. Morning stream hype. I know you've been missing the read streams too, Oscar. So I don't remember what really is going on in this book, nor do I remember all of the voices that I gave the characters, so I'm just going to try my best, and I'm sorry for any inconsistencies. But we're going to finish the book today. So, with that being said, picking up at chapter 15. Joe reached out and grabbed the map. It had to be the one Nancy lost. It looked exactly as she had described it, with pencil markings in the margins. He licked his finger and rubbed some of the ink. It ran. That cinched it. The map was the original. Now how did this get from Nancy's suitcase to Jack and Lori's compartment? Joe wondered. Could Lori have been the thief? Why steal back something that she could have just asked for? At that moment, Joe heard footsteps in the hall. A second later came the dreaded sound of a key fumbling in the lock. Joe's heart stood still. He made a dash for the closet door. Maybe he could hide in there until whoever it was went away. But at the last minute, he remembered all the suitcases inside. They'd fall out when he opened the door. The noise alone would advertise his presence. It was no good. As Joe stood there helplessly, the door swung open. He found himself face to face with Jack Lerner. Jack, Joe stammered, meeting the man's stare. He paused, racking his brains to come up with an explanation for what he was doing in Jack's compartment. Jack seemed utterly startled for a moment. Then his expression changed to anger. He glanced down at the door. Was this open? He asked. Joe cast his eyes to the floor. Actually, no, he said. He tried to think of a good way to get himself out of the jam he was in. Finally, he decided to just tell the truth. I picked the lock, he admitted. Jack crossed his arms and leaned against the doorway. Want to tell me why? He asked, icily polite. I was thinking that all this time I've been looking for Kate, I never looked here. Joe hoped Jack wouldn't make the logical connection, that a part of him had suspected Jack and Lori of being behind Kate's disappearance. But from the expression on the mystery ride organizer's face, Joe realized he hoped in vain. You think Lori and I had something to do with Kate's disappearance? Jack demanded. That's absurd. Joe reached out a hand. No, I mean, well, maybe I did. I guess I just wasn't thinking straight. No, I don't think you were. Jack stepped past Joe and into the room. Look, Joe began, I'm really sorry. No. Jack held up a hand. Breaking into our compartment was stupid, Joe. But I can see you're distraught about Kate. He paused. I suppose that under the circumstances, I understand. You do? Joe asked, meeting the man's eyes in surprise. Jack smiled. I know what it's like to be young, he told Joe. You do foolish things. Joe swallowed his annoyance. He didn't think he was doing anything in the least bit foolish, but he doubted it would be a good idea to debate this point with the man whose compartment he'd just broken into. Jack went on. You really think finding that pin is proof that she's still on the train? At Joe's definitive nod, Jack pursed his lips. There are several places where she could have gotten off, you know, he said, and we've searched high and low for her. I don't think she's here. You're wasting your time, Joe. Joe was silent. He knew he couldn't give up, but there was no point in wasting time arguing about it. He was in a hurry to find Paul Fox and confront him with his suspicions. Right, well, I should get going, he said. Jack saw the map in Joe's hand. Were you planning on taking that? He asked. No, Joe said, handing it over. Do you mind if I ask you how it got here, though? Jack took the map from Joe. I'm starting to feel defensive, Joe, he said, shaking his head slowly. First you break in here because you think Lori and I are holding Kate hostage, and then you imply I stole the map from Nancy. Now Joe felt even more embarrassed. Well, he began. Then he realized it wasn't such an absurd idea. After all, the map did disappear from Nancy's suite, only to turn up in Jack and Lori's compartment. In a way, it's a logical conclusion, he told Jack. Karen found the map this morning, stuffed under our door, Jack explained. I decided to keep it here for safekeeping. I planned to tell Nancy we'd located it, but the group had already left for Copperton. When I see her, I'll tell her that you've got it, Joe suggested. Fine. Jack put the map on the table with the rest of the papers. Now, if you don't mind, I have some work to do. Joe nodded and went to the door. Sure. Look, I really am sorry about everything. No hard feelings? Jack waved his hand absently. No hard feelings. You know, I can't imagine why someone would steal this map. Do you think it was the same guy who's been giving us so much trouble? He asked. It could be, Joe frowned, but I doubt it. He doesn't need it. He seems to know our route. Besides, how could he know Nancy had it? Jack rubbed the back of his neck wearily. You're right. One more mystery. Joe opened the door, his mind already on his conversation with Paul Fox. Don't worry, he said. One way or another, we'll have them all solved by San Francisco. Frank stared out the bus window. Ahead of them to the south, low desert mountain ranges dotted the landscape. What are your thoughts on the Comstock angle? He asked Nancy, who was sitting next to him. Any idea what we're looking for here? Nancy glanced past Frank and out the window. Well, the place we're going to is a copper mine. I guess Jake did all kinds of mining. Anyway, this mine is near Copperton, an old mining town. Bess says it's the largest open-pit copper mine in the country. That's the world, Nancy. Bess leaned over the aisle to correct what Nancy had said. Sarah Finney was sitting next to Bess. You sure have done your research, she told Bess. Bess turned to her. You bet, she said, and immediately began reciting to the Brigstons' representative all the facts she had learned. Frank nodded his head at Bess and grinned at Nancy. There's one person Macklin's research isn't wasted on, he commented. Good old Bess. She does know her stuff, doesn't she? Nancy said with an admiring laugh. Then her eyes turned thoughtful. You know, I really wonder how Macklin uncovered all this information, she said. I mean, how did he ever get the idea that the diamond thief was following the path of a 49er? And how did he figure out just what that path was? I have a feeling that if we knew that, we'd be a lot closer to solving the mystery, Frank answered. It's really too bad about that original map vanishing. I bet that between us and Connie Everett, we might have gotten a couple of leads from Macklin's scribbles. Nancy groaned. Don't remind me, she said. Sorry. Frank took out his copy of the map. Okay, let's get to work. As I see it, we've got a break in the pattern coming up. Really? Intrigued, Nancy took out a pen and paper from her shoulder bag. Shoot. According to Macklin's research, Frank said, Jake's next stop was Reno. That's not a mining town, is it? Nancy thought for a moment. Not that I know of. It is in the middle of mining country, though. Besides, it was the largest town between Utah and California. He had to stop somewhere. Okay, maybe, but what about San Francisco? Frank wanted to know. Nancy tapped her pen against her cheek. Well, that wasn't part of his trip west exactly. Remember what Jack told us the first day? Jake settled in San Francisco and became a banker. She pulled out her information packet and consulted a piece of paper. It says on this biography sheet that he used the money he'd made in mining to open the Comstock Bank and Trust. Oh, right, Frank said, deflated. Smart guy. He looked out the window again, letting his thoughts wander over the clues they had so far. He saw what looked like a small town up ahead. That must be Copperton, he said to Nancy, pointing out the window. I guess so, she said. Apparently we're heading for the mine first, but we'll stop in town on the way back to the train. Frank put his hands behind his head. Okay, before we get to the mine, let's figure out what we're looking for, he said. He paused. The thief was on Jake's trail. Why? If he just wanted to stash the diamond somewhere until the police stopped looking for it, he didn't have to do it in such a roundabout way. True, Nancy said. Maybe he was looking for a particular place to stash it, she suggested, looking thoughtful. Some place that only Jake knew about, like one of his old claims. But why? Frank wanted to know. What would be the point? He made a little gesture of frustration. This whole mystery is so vague, he complained. We're looking for a diamond that's been hidden for 15 years, somewhere between Chicago and San Francisco, we think. Do you realize that's more than half the width of the United States? That's a lot of ground to cover. If only we had one concrete clue. Looking for one of Jake Comstock's old claims, he muttered half to himself. What good would that do anyone? Suddenly, something Rich Miller had told her came back to Nancy. She laid a hand on Frank's arm. Hey, remember I told you that Jake Comstock supposedly left an unmined claim somewhere? She said in a low voice. Frank looked puzzled. I remember. What about it? He asked. Well, if it really does contain that motherlode, as Rich Miller says, then it's worth a ton of money. A lot more than any diamond, Nancy explained. Now, our mysterious thief seems to have known quite a bit about Jake Comstock. What I'm getting at is, suppose he heard the stories about the old claim. We do know he asked Rich about it. You mean suppose his trips to these sites had nothing to do at all with the diamond? Suppose he was just trying to find the motherlode? Frank groaned. Nancy, you're bringing in a whole new mystery here. The old one's confusing enough already. I'm sorry, Nancy said with a guilty grin. Besides, Frank went on, I thought that unmined claim was somewhere around Central City. Nancy shrugged. Maybe the thief didn't know that, she suggested. Maybe, Frank echoed. He gave Nancy a sideways glance. What do you want to do about it, then? I don't know, Nancy was forced to admit. A few minutes later, the bus pulled to a stop. Lori stood up at the front. We're here, she said brightly. Meet back at the bus in 2 hours. Don't forget we stop in Copperton on the way back. Frank followed Nancy and Bess out of the bus. Outside, the air was full of dust from the mine. There were huge mounds of dirt and a staircase leading from the ground level up to the top of one of the mounds. As the group climbed the stairs, Frank let his thoughts wander on the mystery. What was the thief looking for? He had the diamond. All he had to do was hide it and wait to sell it. Why hadn't he done that? Why was he following Jake Comstock's path instead? Frank slowly climbed the stairs behind Nancy and Bess. Suddenly, he heard Bess give a cry of surprise. When he got to the top of the stairs, he understood her reaction. In front of him, a huge pit spread out in an irregular shape. It had to be at least 2.5 miles wide and 1.5 miles deep. He could barely make out the bulldozers and dump trucks that were working on it. Impressive, ain't it? Connie Everett said, standing beside Frank. But I'll let you kids in on a little secret that's even more impressive. Frank glanced at Nancy and Bess and exchanged a smile with them. What's that, Connie? He asked. Everett paused. Then he poked a finger at Frank's chest and announced in a dramatic voice, I've solved the mystery. That's end of chapter 15. Are feelings ever not hard? I don't know. I feel like I sometimes have soft feelings. Hi, HS. Good morning. The nostalgia is real. Wake up slowly. Don't think I could wake up this slowly. Hi, Moocher. Happy afternoon to you. Good morning, Christy. How are you? Copper Gorge. Hey, Coley. Happy Thursday. Good morning. I'm really excited to be streaming in the mornings again. I think it's like I'm just in a great mood because I feel like I can stream more when I have mornings available than when I have evenings available. For some reason, I just am tired a lot of evenings, so. Hey, Dizzy, how's it going? Good morning. I'm doing pretty dang good, Christy. I'm having a great week. Quit my old job, started my new job. It's just, I'm really excited and happy about everything, so. I'm doing fantastic, which is way better than I have been doing, so. I'm doing much better. Okay. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and move on. Chapter 16. You mean you found the diamond? Nancy cried. Everett's smug expression rapidly vanished. Well, not exactly, he confessed. So what do you mean you've solved the mystery? Frank asked him. I mean I know who took it, Everett said, keeping his voice low. He looked over his shoulder. Nancy saw Maggie Horn staring at them with icy blue eyes. Look, can you keep this under your hats? Everett asked them. I don't want the whole world to know. If you don't want anyone else to know, then why are you telling us? Nancy asked. I want to know what he's telling us, Frank said firmly. Did you solve the crime or not? Everett motioned them to a corner of the overlook. I solved a huge chunk of it, he told them when they were standing away from the rest of the group. And Goldstein wasn't one bit of help, I might add. That guy should stick to writing movies. He doesn't know the first thing about real crime. But I'd appreciate it if you didn't tell him I said that, Everett added. We won't, Nancy said. She tried to steer Everett back on track. What exactly have you figured out? I like you kids, Everett said. I like your style. That brother of yours was in hot water, but he didn't let it get to him. I like that. So I'll tell you. He leaned in and looked at Nancy with his watery brown eyes. It was no common thief who took that diamond. It was the mastermind. The mastermind? Frank echoed. And who's he? Everett pulled back and stuffed his hands in his jacket pockets. Only the most creative jewel thief of the past 50 years. He shook his head slowly. I can't believe it. I've researched him and everything. All the facts were staring me right in the face, and I didn't put them together until we were on the bus. Goldstein and his little theories were distracting me, I guess. Exactly how does this guy operate? Frank asked, and what makes you so sure that it was him? Slow down, Frank, Nancy urged. Why don't you take it one fact at a time? She said to Everett. Right. Everett pulled his hands out of his pockets and counted his fingers. Fact. The mastermind specializes in hidden auction houses. The security generally isn't as tight as a jeweler's. Fact. He's a pro, and Sarah Finney said it was a professional job. But the most important fact of all is this crazy out-of-the-way route he took for stashing the diamond. What do you mean? Bess wanted to know. We know he was following Jake Comstock. Everett's laugh came out as a wheeze. He pulled a handkerchief out of his breast pocket to put it over his mouth. When he'd finally stopped laughing, he said, "You kids kill me. You really do. You don't buy that whole Comstock line, do ya?" Nancy saw the color rise in Bess's cheeks. "But," Bess began. Nancy interrupted her friend. "You're saying Jake Comstock didn't have anything to do with the route the thief took?" she asked Everett. Before Everett could answer, Frank broke in. In both Emerald and Central City, people remember a guy coming around 15 years ago asking about Jake Comstock. "It's a red herring, kids," Everett said. "You guys know what that is, right?" Nancy nodded, but Bess looked blank. "A false clue," Nancy explained. She turned from Everett to look out at the mountains that surrounded them and thought for a moment. The dry desert wind blew through her hair. "Let me see if I understand," Nancy said, looking back at Everett. "The thief pretends to be trying to find information about Comstock, but all the while he's just laying the groundwork for an elaborate wild goose chase just in case 15 years later someone comes looking for him." "That's crazy," Frank said. "No thief operates that way. He'd call so much attention to himself. Why not just disappear with the diamond?" Everett threw his hands up in despair. "Okay, so I'm a crackpot. Is that what you're saying?" Nancy was quiet. Secretly, she didn't think Everett was taking the Comstock connection seriously enough, but she didn't want to say that to him. Besides, what if he was right? "The mastermind loves to leave false trails," Everett ventured. "He likes confusing the police. He likes to pop up, make himself obvious, and then disappear. It's more fun for him that way. Plus, maybe he almost wants to get caught," he added. "But no one has ever caught him. He's that good. Tell you the truth, I kind of admire the guy." "So where do you think he actually stashed the gem?" Frank asked after a moment. Everett sighed. "If I knew that, do you think I'd be standing here?" he asked with a shrug. "Do you think he hid it along his route, or did he keep it with him the whole time?" "You mean the diamond could have been in San Francisco this whole time?" Bess asked, her eyes growing wide. "I wouldn't be at all surprised," Everett answered. "Not one teeny bit." Joe Hardy was definitely feeling frustrated. He was eager to confront Paul Fox and get his suspicions out in the open. However, the actor was nowhere to be found. Joe had knocked at his compartment door and then looked for him in the lounge car. Now he was back at Paul's compartment, but Paul still was not there. Joe made his way through Paul's sleeper car. His mind went to the map he'd found in Jack and Laurie's compartment. It had to have been taken from Nancy's suitcase by somebody on the train. How did he or she know where to find it? And why did he or she return it to Jack and Laurie? The Comstock diamond case was getting very complicated, Joe mused. Maybe he should be spending his time on that rather than looking for Kate, he realized sadly. Yes, it was time to move on. When Frank, Nancy, and Bess came back, Joe would really dig into the Comstock case. If Kate was gone, she was gone, and that was that. Joe reached out to the side of the car to balance himself just then. His hand knocked against a wall and made a hollow sound. The noise caught his attention. Joe knocked on the wall again. It was definitely hollow. His excitement mounting, Joe felt along the wall for a handle or hinges. He couldn't find a handle, but hidden underneath a little flap of metal, he found a tiny hole. Joe grabbed a ballpoint pen from his shirt pocket and jabbed the pin into the hole. The panel popped open and Joe was staring at the inside of an electrical closet. And on the floor, with a gag over her mouth, was Kate Harkins. Joe dropped to his knees beside her and pulled Kate into his arms. It was the last thing he remembered, because in the next second he felt a hard, dull thud at the back of his neck. A ringing blackness surrounded him and he slumped to the floor. End of chapter 16. Now we're getting into some Johnny Kudo stuff. Good morning, Tara. Thank you for shouting out Dizzy. Thank you for shouting out Coley. I appreciate it. You love the super mystery crossover novels. This is the first Nancy Drew Hardy Boys super mystery I've read, because I'm reading all of the books that the games are based on in order of the games. So, like, after this one, I'll read, what is number 4? I'll read Danger by Design, the book that Danger by Design is based off of. Joe Hardy was definitely feeling frustrated. He really wanted a cheeseburger. I know. Don't we all really want a cheeseburger, though? Good morning, Baltimore. Every day's like an open door. This music's so good. So how's everybody doing this morning before I jump into the rest? How many chapters are there? I'm gonna look. Thank you for the claps. There are 23 chapters. I've read 16. Do you guys like my shirt too? River Heights class of 1930 high school. Summer got it for me for Christmas. My Christmas present from Summer. It's also the same shirt that I gifted G for Christmas. And when I got this one in the mail, it never said who it was from, so I thought he sent me the same thing I had sent him. But it was from Summer. We just had the same idea for a present. Anyway. Alright, moving on. Chapter 17. Do you think Connie Everett is right? Bess asked Nancy as she put the finishing touches on a fresh coat of, imagine that, pink nail polish. Nancy and Bess were in their compartment getting ready for the fancy dress dinner Jack and Lori had arranged. Afterward, the ride's organizers wanted the group to share information on their progress of the mystery. If anyone knows about the mastermind, Nancy told Bess, buttoning her black tuxedo pants, I'd say it's Connie Everett. But does that mean it really is the mastermind in the case? Bess asked. She turned back to the mirror to smooth her royal blue flounced skirt over her hips. Nancy tucked in her emerald green blouse and threw on an ivory dinner jacket. She shook her head. I don't know, it's a good theory and we'll have to follow it up. How are we going to do that? Bess asked. When we get to Reno, we'll get any information we can about the mastermind, like where he was right after the theft. Nancy slipped on her black flats. Maybe the Reno police could find out from old FBI files or something like that. I think Connie has a contact on the Reno police force, which is lucky for us. Bess tilted her head and ran some gloss over her lips. You know, I've been so caught up in this mystery that I haven't even thought about Paul. But tonight... Nancy touched Bess's shoulder lightly, her eyes twinkling. That's the Bess I know and love. Are you ready? Bess checked that her nails were dry. Then she fluffed up her curls one last time and grabbed the royal blue purse that matched her dress. Now I am, she said. Nancy held the door open for her friend and switched off the lights. Oh, hey, I almost forgot, Bess said as they headed off toward the dining car. On the bus to Copperton, Sarah Finney was telling me about the Comstock diamond, and she says that Lori Adams put in a silent bid on it when it was up for auction 15 years ago. Strange coincidence, isn't it? Nancy stopped dead in her tracks. What? When were you planning on telling me this, Bess? She asked. Bess stuck out her lower lip just a bit. I'm telling you now, aren't I? I would have told you on the bus, but you and Frank were so busy talking I didn't want to interrupt. What else did Sarah say? Nancy prodded. I thought she wasn't even working at Brixton's at the time. She wasn't, Bess confirmed. She read through all the old files to get ready for the trip. There was a record of all the bids in there. Do you really think that's important? She added excitedly. I don't know. Lori seems to be a lot more interested in the Comstock family than she's been letting on. She hasn't been doing any investigation on this trip, though, Nancy said, thinking aloud. So even if she did bid for the diamond 15 years ago, she doesn't seem to have a strong urge to be the one to find it now. Bess shrugged. Maybe that's why she was so interested in Ralph Macklin's research. She already knew all about the diamond. That's probably true, Nancy said, but why keep it a secret? I don't know, Nan, Bess said. Maybe she's just secretive by nature. Come on, we're going to be late. Frank Hardy was already sitting at a table when Nancy and Bess walked into the dining car. His eyes were glued to the entrance to the car. When he spotted the girls, he raced over to them. Have either of you seen Joe? He asked. No, Bess said, giving Frank a puzzled look. Why? Is something wrong? Nancy asked, instantly alert. She thought she caught a note of extreme anxiety in Frank's voice. Frank nervously ran a hand through his dark hair. I don't know, maybe not. He isn't in our compartment. I've looked all over for him and I cannot find him. Nancy's eyes opened wide. You don't think, she said softly. I don't know what to think, Frank said with exasperation. Maybe he got off the train in Kearns and we left without him, or maybe whatever happened to Kate has also happened to him. You think that's what happened, don't you? Nancy asked. Why? It's just a feeling, Frank answered, keeping his voice low as the other guests filtered into the dining car. Have you told anyone else? Nancy queried. Yes, Frank nodded. As soon as I realized Joe was gone, I found Greg Ashby. We went through the train looking for him, and not a trace. Bess's soft blue eyes were distressed. Wow, she breathed. Poor Joe. I talked to the conductor. He had a list of who was on the bus to Copperton. Everybody was on the list except for Joe and Jack Lerner, and the train crew, of course, Frank told the girls. Nancy studied his eyes. But there's something else, isn't there? She asked. I can tell by your expression. Frank gave half a smile. As usual, you're right. He looked around the room to make sure they weren't overheard. Paul Fox was signed up to go on the Copperton tour, but he didn't go. One of the trainmen saw him in the parking lot after the bus left, so it looks like he was around too. Oh, say it's not Paul, Bess moaned. Her eyes followed the good-looking actor as he moved from guest to guest, making conversation. It couldn't be Jack, Nancy said, frowning. Could it? I can't come up with any motive for him, Frank said, frowning. He says he did talk to Joe for a few minutes in his compartment, but that was the only time he saw him. Have you spoken to Paul? Bess asked. No, I haven't been able to get him alone, Frank replied, sounding frustrated. And then there's always the possibility that our saboteur has struck again, he added. But since there haven't been any more incidents aboard the train, I'm beginning to wonder if that guy's still with us. The waiters had started serving dinner. We should sit down, Bess urged. Frank followed Nancy and Bess back to the table where he'd been sitting. After they sat down, Nancy leaned her elbows on the table. What's the plan? Frank let out a long sigh. Ashby said there isn't much we can do till we get to Reno. He did inform the police in Kearns, though. Nancy and Bess were quiet as the waiter served them. There was nothing much to say, and during dinner they made only small talk. Frank didn't even pretend to pay attention to the conversation. He'll turn up, Frank, Nancy finally said as the waiter cleared their plates. I know he will. Joe is a resourceful guy. No one can keep him down for long. Frank reached over and squeezed her hand. Thanks, he said. Jack Lerner stopped by their table on his way toward the front of the room. I'm so sorry about your brother, he said to Frank, but we'll find him, don't you worry. Then he turned to Nancy. I wanted you to know we found the map, he told Nancy. You did? Bess said brightly. That's great news. Nancy thanked Jack Lerner. Any idea who might have taken it? She asked. Jack? Lori called out across the dining room. Let's get started. No idea. Now, if you'll excuse me, Jack said. He walked across the dining car to where Lori was standing. Soon he was rapping a spoon against his water glass and calling for the group's attention. It's been 4 days now since this trip started, Jack reminded the group. We hope most of you have some solid leads by now. I'd like to open this session by asking if there's anyone who'd like to share what they know or pose a question to the group. I have a question, Maggie Horn answered. She stood up and cleared her throat. It's occurred to several of us, she looked down at John Grayson, who was sitting next to her, that there's one possibility you and Lori haven't taken into account. That is, what if we get to San Francisco, still haven't found the diamond, and don't realize until then that it's actually hidden in a spot we've already passed? Lori stood up. Maggie has raised a very important point. In fact, I'm surprised no one's brought this up before now. Sarah, would you like to answer that? Sarah Finney spoke from her table. Briggson's will investigate any and all leads that come from this trip. Jack and Lori will see this through to the end as well. Unfortunately, the reward applies only to whoever actually finds the diamond. You're all more than welcome to continue your search after the trip, too, in the hopes of getting the reward. Thank you, Maggie Horn said, sitting down again. Anyone else? Jack asked the group. Frank watched as several people looked at their notes and conferred in small groups. Connie Everett and Lee Goldstein were sitting at a table next to them having a heated discussion. Tell them, Goldstein was urging, holding onto Everett's arm. Everett pulled back. No way, Lee, this clue's mine. I don't want her. He pointed his head at Maggie. Horning in on it. Ha ha! Frank smiled at Nancy and Bess. That guy's too much, he said. Goldstein sighed and rolled his eyes. Well, I'm going to tell them, he said, starting to stand up. One of them might know what to make of that idea of yours. You'd better not! Everett practically shouted, grabbing Goldstein's arm. Is there something wrong over there? Jack asked Goldstein. Goldstein yanked his arm away. My good friend Connie Everett thinks this crime was committed by a famous criminal known as the Mastermind, he announced before Everett could stop him. Everett sank in his chair and put his hands over his face. Connie, Jack said, would you elaborate on what Lee just told us? Frank watched as Everett pulled his hands away from his face and stood up reluctantly. Briefly, he told the group what he had told Nancy, Frank, and Bess earlier. When he was done, Everett sat down and turned to Goldstein. I hope you're satisfied. Goldstein looked smug. I'll bet you $10 one of these people can take your idea and make something out of it. I've worked in Hollywood. Collaboration's where it's at. The noise of the crowd grew as they discussed the Mastermind until a voice called out, Before all you people get away, you should know the Mastermind was eliminated years ago as a suspect in this case. Frank looked up and saw that Greg Ashby was standing now. The police detective held out his hands for silence. Everett's idea is good, but the police have already investigated the angle. I was a rookie then, but I clearly remember that the Mastermind was ruled out. Everett stood up and faced off with Ashby. What makes you so sure it wasn't him just because you ruled him out? He demanded. The crowd was hushed as the two men stared at each other. Because he was committing a crime in Europe at the time? Ashby announced. Everett's face turned bright red. But, he stammered. So much for Connie's knowledge of the Mastermind, Nancy said. It looks like we're back to square one. The next morning, the train stopped in Reno. Frank watched wearily as Nancy and Bess went off with Connie Everett. Joe still had not turned up, and Frank hadn't gotten much sleep the night before. He was feeling more than frustrated. Where had Joe gotten to? He couldn't stand to consider the terrible possibilities. Frank just hoped Nancy would have more luck. After Everett's theory about the Mastermind had been dashed at dinner, the rest of the evening had turned into a bit of a disaster. Everett had stalked out of the room and the evening broke up soon after. Now humbled, Everett had asked if he could help Nancy, Bess, and the Hardys with their investigation. Nancy was insistent on following through on the Comstock angle. She was convinced that knowing more about Jake Comstock was the only way to learn what the thief had been up to when he'd followed the miner's route. So she, Bess, and Everett were heading off to do research on Comstock in the hopes they might get a decent lead. From the observation area, Frank spotted police cars pulling up to the train. True to his word, Ashby had enlisted the Reno authorities to help in the search for Joe and Kate. Frank was grateful for the Chicago detectives' help. He watched as Ashby briefed the Reno police on the situation. Then he noticed a short man with black hair shot through with gray who was watching the scene intently. Frank's heart started beating in double time. Unless he was very wrong, he had just spotted the saboteur. Hey! Frank called out, jumping from the train. The man saw Frank coming toward him and took off at a run. Frank raced after him through the station and out onto the street. Cars whizzed past, just missing both of them as Frank chased the man through the street. The guy tore down the block. You're not getting away this time, Frank shouted, putting on speed. He chased the guy for 2 blocks, his longer legs allowing him to close the gap. Finally, on a deserted side street, he was near enough to make a flying tackle. Frank threw himself on the guy, and the two of them tumbled to the sidewalk. Frank pinned the man's arms and sat on his legs. His opponent twisted and turned, but Frank held on. Forget it, he grunted. This time you're caught. Frank flipped over the guy so he could face him. Where is he? Frank asked through clenched teeth. What'd you do with my brother? End of chapter 17. Granny V, class of 1930. Yeah. It's very accurate. It was 92 years ago. What's the matter? What's wrong? Do you hear something? Is there someone outside? Joe will turn up as a corpse. Can't interrupt Frank. Gosh, Nancy and Frank were talking. Sure. Thanks for the claps. What are you mad about? What are you mad about? Your tail is wagging. What are you mad about? What is it? Uh-huh. I hear you. What are you upset about? He's apparently mad that I stopped reading. I don't know. He's leaving. I don't know what he was upset about. Mad about Joe, mad about... Yeah, I don't know. My dog is like... he was just like sitting here wagging his tail with a toy in his mouth. And just like growling. I don't... And then when I moved, he was like... Ah! I don't know what his problem was. Okay. Moving on. After I take another sip of coffee. My coffee's getting cold. It's pretty room temp now. Drinking that decaf for my vertigo. Yeah, I think maybe he wanted me to like play tug of war or something with him, but I wasn't going to be doing that. Chapter 18. The man stared blankly at Frank. I don't know what you're talking about, he said in a calm, almost polite voice. Frank let go of the guy's arms and pulled back. Had he gotten it wrong? In the second that Frank let go, the man sat up and knocked Frank off of him, pulling his legs free. Off balance, Frank could only watch as the guy sprinted off. Frank pulled himself up and took off after the guy who was turning onto a busier street. He had a good head start, but Frank was determined not to let him get away this time. On either side, neon lights advertising casinos and hotels blinked at Frank. Luckily, the sidewalks were not jammed and Frank was able to keep his quarry in sight. There was almost a whole block between them, though. Frank pushed ahead, his legs pumping faster and faster. His quarry hadn't yet made it to the end of the block. In fact, he was slowing to a fast walk. Why? Frank wondered. Then he saw it. A bus had pulled to a stop and the guy was the only one getting on. Frank shouted, "Wait!" and rushed up to the bus. It was too late. The doors were closed and the bus was pulling away. Frank saw his quarry press close to a window and give him a mocking grin. Frank leaned over and rested his hands on his knees, breathing hard. He scanned the street, frantically looking for a cab. He could follow the bus, he thought, but it wasn't over yet. But there was no sign of a taxi. Frank stood on the corner for 5 minutes, alternately staring down the street and searching for a cab. Finally, he gave up. The saboteur was gone. Dejected, Frank made his way back to the train station, hoping that Nancy or Greg Ashby had some luck. His pace picked up when he spotted Paul Fox hurrying away from the train. "Paul!" Frank shouted. This was his chance to interrogate Paul about Joe's disappearance. "Could I talk to you for a second?" Paul stopped and turned back. He waited for Frank to catch up with him. Frank jogged up to the answer. "Actor." "Thanks for stopping," he began, but Paul cut him off. "Just what are you trying to do to me?" he demanded, his voice harsh with rage. "What did I ever do to you that you want to ruin my career?" "Huh?" Frank took a step backward, dumbfounded. "Ruin your career? What are you talking about?" "Don't tell me you don't know what I mean," Paul snarled. "First Kate, and now you've got that overzealous cop breathing down my neck telling me that your brother's vanished and I'm responsible?" Whoa, back up, Frank said. So Ashby had already interviewed Paul about Joe's disappearance. "So you don't know anything about Joe's disappearance," Frank said, eyeing Paul narrowly. Paul took a deep breath. "No, I didn't even know he was missing until that clown Ashby accosted me this morning," he explained. "And by the way, I do have an alibi, as you mystery people say, for the relevant times." "Oh?" Frank asked. "Yes, sorry to burst your bubble." Paul's nostrils flared. "With witnesses and everything. I didn't go on the tour yesterday because I went to meet an old friend who moved to Salt Lake City. I left about 10 minutes after the bus, and I didn't get back until the train was about to pull out of the station." Frank pursed his lips thoughtfully. It was likely that Paul was telling the truth, an alibi that would be pretty easy to check. Ashby would check it, too. "Well, I guess you're off the hook, then, as far as my brother's disappearance goes," Frank said in a mild voice. Then abruptly he barked out, "But we do know you left that anonymous note accusing Joe of being involved in Kate's disappearance." He wanted to see if he could catch Paul off guard. He succeeded. Paul blanched for a moment before deciding to tough it out. "So," he said, sneering, "that's no crime." "No, not in itself," Frank acknowledged. "But it does make us very curious as to how much you know about where Kate is. You're at the top of Ashby's suspect list for that one." "Me?" Paul's jaw dropped. His look of surprise was comical. Frank thought either he's one great actor or this is really news to him. "You can't be serious. I'm the one that told everybody she was missing," Paul objected after a moment. "But you could have done that to divert suspicion from yourself," Frank pointed out. "But..." Paul seemed truly alarmed. "Why would I want to get rid of Kate? She's my scene partner." "And she's also competition," Frank said. "You're both trying to get into a super Hollywood You're trying to get a super Hollywood agent to represent you. He may not be able to take on both of you. Paul gave a queer little laugh and closed his eyes for a second. This is like a bad dream, he muttered, half to himself. What is? Frank asked. Paul opened his eyes and gazed wearily at Frank. Okay, I guess it's time for the truth, he said. Frank crossed his arms. That would be nice, he said in a neutral voice. I never told her this, but I need Kate for that audition, Paul confessed. He took a deep breath. The only reason we got the chance to do it at all is because one of Isaac's scouts saw Kate in a show in Chicago and loved her. I've been helping to manage her career, so this guy asked if I could get her out to Hollywood. He shrugged. It was a golden opportunity. I set it up so she'd audition with a scene that needed a partner. Well, you still have the audition, don't you? Frank asked. Paul shook his head vehemently. That's just it. I don't have the audition. I called Isaac's office this morning and told them that Kate couldn't make it. He told me not to bother coming unless she was with me. Paul raised his hands in a gesture of futility. So you see, I have a very good reason for wanting Kate to be found. Frank found Paul's self-absorption a little repulsive, but he had to admit that the actor was right. He didn't seem like a likely candidate for Kate's kidnapper or Joe's. Which brought Frank back to the saboteur. That guy was the only suspect left, but Frank had lost him and there was no telling where he was now or what he had done with Joe. With a mumbled apology to Paul, Frank climbed back onto the train. He was feeling distinctly depressed. Just what are we looking for? Bess wanted to know as Nancy led the way through the main branch of the Reno Public Library. Nancy glanced up at the library's vaulted ceiling. She wondered if she was leading them on a wild goose chase. But no, if the diamond thief had been looking for information on Jake Comstock, that's what they had to do too. Let's talk for a moment, Everett said, pulling out his handkerchief and mopping his face. He led them over to a set of curved wooden benches along one wall. I spent most of the night thinking about this, he said. After Ashby told us that the mastermind was out of the picture, I decided, okay, back to basics. So what are the basics? Bess asked him, blowing a curl out of her face. I'll bet Nancy would like to answer that one, Everett said hastily. Nancy suspected that Everett didn't have a clue as to what the basics were. He needed her to bail him out. She narrowed her eyes. The thief was probably investigating Jake Comstock, she said. All we know is that there was something he needed to know or something he had to find. I'm beginning to think that the thief didn't hide the diamond along this route. He took this way for a different reason. Everett beamed. My thoughts precisely. So where should we start? Nancy asked. We don't have much time. She checked her watch. It was almost 1. The train leaves at 2. What do you know so far about Jake Comstock? Everett asked Nancy. Nancy blew out her breath. Not much. In Central City, we found out that Jake may have left his heirs the claim to a motherlode of gold, only no one knows where the mine is, she said. I keep coming back to that idea. If there really is a gold mine, it has to be worth an awful lot of money, and since the thief probably knew a lot about Jake Comstock, maybe he was looking for the claim. Then why steal the diamond? Everett objected. A gold mine's worth a lot more, and the guy could have risked everything if he got caught stealing the diamond. Nancy frowned. I know, that part doesn't quite make sense, she admitted. I think Jake was a little crazy, Bess announced. He sounds weird. He carried around a pretty expensive diamond as a good luck charm. He found $1 million gold vein and never mind it. Everett took up the theme enthusiastically. Yeah, and didn't Jack say that Jake finally had the Comstock diamond cut into the shape of a pyramid? Maybe Jake joined a bizarre cult. I'll bet if you looked up his will, you'd find he left all his money to the Temple of Isis or something like that. Nancy stood up abruptly. You two just gave me an idea, she said, leading them across the library's marble lobby to the circulation desk. While they were waiting for the librarian to finish checking out some books, Bess looked at Nancy. You want to let us in on this idea that we gave you? She asked. Nancy drummed her fingers on the circulation desk. Genealogy, she said shortly, trying to catch the librarian's eyes. Bess stared. What? She asked. Everett looked thoroughly puzzled. You mean trace Jake Comstock's descendants? Right, Nancy declared. Maybe we can get more of a lead on this alleged gold claim by finding out who Jake's heirs were. If there were any Comstocks still living, we could contact them, see if they know anything about it. Hey, that's good, Everett said approvingly. How are we going to do it? Bess asked. There's a library of genealogical information in Salt Lake City, Everett offered. That's what I had in mind. Do you think this library is hooked into it by computer? Nancy asked anxiously. Only one way to find out, Everett replied as the librarian came over to them. Can I help you? He asked, staring at the three of them over the top of his glasses. Everett introduced himself, Nancy, and Bess. Jared Sanford, the librarian said, shaking Everett's hand. What can I do for you? We have a favor to ask, Nancy said. We need to find out everything we can about a 49er named Jake Comstock. Do you have a computer that can access the genealogical database in Salt Lake City? We do, Sanford said, but I don't know if it will give you much useful information. All the genealogical database tells you is who a person's ancestors and descendants were. Nancy nodded. That's a start. Can we give it a try? Sanford led them to a room behind the circulation desk. There he sat down at a computer terminal and tapped out a few keystrokes. Nancy watched over his shoulder as he worked. Comstock settled in San Francisco, Everett told him. Would not show when he died, but it was probably around the turn of the century. Nancy felt her hopes rising as Sanford typed the name. A series of names with codes alongside them appeared on the computer screen. Let's see, Sanford said, tapping out another series of keystrokes. Jake Comstock died in San Francisco. That's him! Bess cried. Sanford hit the print command. In a second, the printer next to the computer was humming away. When it was done, Sanford reached over and ripped off a sheet. This is all there is, he told them. I hope it's a help. Everett snatched the paper from Sanford and scanned it. When he finished, his eyes were gleaming. Read this, he told Nancy. What is it? Nancy asked, taking the printer out from Everett. Bess leaned over to read along with her. Nancy glanced through the report, which was a computer-drawn family tree listing Jake's descendants and their families. It wasn't until Nancy got to the end of the report that she realized what Everett had meant. Jake Comstock only had 2 living direct descendants. One of them was a man named Stan Leeton, and the other, Lori Adams. End of chapter 18. He want to play. My dog sounds straight up feral when she plays Tug of War with Pupper Stream. Anna would mark her calendar. If I did a Pupper Stream, Anna would insist on a Twix stream, probably. And even if I didn't, yeah, that's true. Hi, Puffy, good morning. Good observation, Nancy. If there's a gold mine, it may be worth a lot of money. Who knew? Thank you for the clapses. Thank you for the clapses. So we've read 18 out of 23 chapters. And I'm pretty... I knew Jack and Lori were sus. Pretty sure they were the ones that beat up Joe and Kate and put them in the hole in the wall and stole the map, and this whole thing is just so they can get detectives to do their dirty work for them, but they're criminals. I don't know. That's my call. Okay. My stomach is growling. I'm hungry. My face itches. Okay. I'm trying to get comfortable. Okay. No, that's not comfortable. I don't know why I'm stalling. Chapter 19. I knew it! Didn't I say Jake Comstock reminded me of someone? Bess was saying. It was Lori Adams, but who could have guessed? The question is she keeping it a secret on purpose? Nancy wondered aloud. She must be, but why? Nancy, Frank, Bess, and Everett were back in Nancy and Bess's compartment. The train was heading west through the desert to California. There's a lot Lori hasn't told us, Frank said. Everett leaned back in his seat with his legs stretched out in front of him. I think it would be a big mistake to confront her now. Let's see what else we can find out before we do. Nancy sighed. Ever since they'd learned that Lori was related to Jake Comstock, she'd been torn. There hadn't been time in Reno to do any more research. They had to rush back to the station to catch the train as it was. Now they were stuck. They knew that Lori had been holding out on them, but that didn't necessarily mean she was guilty of any crime. Except there was something about Lori that was nagging at Nancy. What was it? We also need to find out who Stan Leeton is, Frank added. The report the librarian gave you said he's Lori's cousin. Does she know him, and how does he figure in all of this? We'll do a check on both of them in Sacramento, Everett said. We should be there in about an hour. We just have to sit tight until then. And to make sure Lori doesn't know we know about Jake Comstock, Bess added. How much time do we have in Sacramento? Frank asked Everett. It wasn't one of the mystery train's scheduled stops. They were just pulling in there while the engine was switched. Everett waved a hand. Don't worry, we only need a couple of minutes to get to the police station. Luckily, I have a contact there who owes me a favor. I wired him from Reno to get us any information in the FBI files about both Stan Leeton and Lori Adams. I wish I knew what Lori was up to, Nancy said after a minute. I just can't figure what the connection is between all these separate facts. She looked at Frank. Do you have any brilliant ideas, Frank? She asked. Frank, who was preoccupied, started slightly. Who, me? He asked. Then he sighed. I'm really sorry, Nancy, but I'm having trouble thinking straight right now. Joe's fine, I'm sure of it, Bess said timidly. We'll find your brother, Frank, Everett put in, and that guy you saw back at the station. Ashby's got the Reno police looking for him. They'll turn something up, and I bet when they find the guy, they'll find Joe, too. Nancy was only half listening to Everett. She stared out the window and watched the sun glow over the desert. Jake Comstock's claim, the diamond, Lori Adams. She remembered talking to Lori in her compartment the night Lori gave her the map. Was Lori reluctant to give her the map because she knew it held an important clue? So far, Lori had hidden a lot from them. Was there something in the map she was hiding too? Nancy remembered how cagey Lori had been about the other papers in her compartment. She thought back, trying to remember if she had seen something else among the papers on Lori's desk. Then an idea came to her. His will, Nancy found herself saying. Maybe that was Jake Comstock's will I saw. What are you talking about? Frank asked. The night Lori gave me the map, I saw a copy of some kind of legal paper tucked in with Lori's other papers, Nancy said, her excitement mounting. It had the name Comstock on it. I asked her if it had anything to do with Jake, and she denied it. She said it had nothing to do with our case, that it was part of her research for a book on the San Francisco Comstocks. But now I'm ready to bet she was lying. I think it was Jake's will. So? Bess asked. So Lori has a copy of Jake's will. What does it mean? Maybe it means... Oh, hang on. What does it mean? Maybe it means she gets to inherit the Comstock diamond? Bess theorized. But if she's the rightful heir, why would she put in an anonymous bid for it in an auction? Nancy objected. I think there must be something else. Frank was leaning forward now, as excited as Nancy. What else did Jake leave to his heirs? He asked with a glint in his eye. The mining claim, Nancy and Everett said in unison. Frank and Bess laughed. Everett smiled at Nancy. Brilliant minds think alike, eh? He said. Okay, so maybe Lori is on the trail of the claim. Maybe it's even legally hers, since it's been handed down in the family. But we're still stuck with the fact that she never told anyone on the trip about all this, and why hide that fact? If only we could take a look at that will, Nancy said. Connie checked his watch. 15 minutes and we'll be in Sacramento. You kids want to come with me to the police station? Are you kidding? Frank asked with a laugh. And miss the major break in this case? Nancy stood up. That doesn't give us any time to look at the will, does it? She asked. Frank shook his head. Besides, what are you going to do? Ask Lori if you could take a peek at it? We don't want her to know you're at all suspicious of her. Nancy put her hands in the pockets of her jeans. I guess you're right. Nancy, Bess said, I recognize that look. What look? Nancy asked, her eyes widening innocently. You're going to sneak into Lori's compartment, aren't you? Bess said, confronting her. Before Nancy could answer, Everett was on his feet. I think it's a great idea. I like the way you think, Nancy, he told her, giving her a slap on the back. But it'll have to wait until we get back. Besides, we'll have more information then. Nancy agreed reluctantly. Everett was right. They'd have more time later. Besides, Nancy would have to wait until Jack and Lori were out of their compartment, and she didn't know when that would be. When the train pulled into the station in Sacramento, Nancy, Frank, Bess, and Everett were the first off. In about 5 minutes, they were pulling up in front of the one-story police station. We're here to see Quentin Lee, Everett told the day sergeant at the front desk. She buzzed Lee on the intercom, and a minute later, a short, burly man with gray hair greeted Everett. Connie, great to see you, he said, giving Everett a vigorous handshake. It's been at least 10 years. Since I was researching that book on the Vineyard Wars, Everett said, returning his shake. You are a big help then, Quentin. The book kind of flopped, but that's how it is. Hey, Lee said, standing back. I still have my autographed copy. Everett quickly introduced Nancy, Frank, and Bess. Do you have any news for us? Nancy wanted to know. Lee ushered them into his small office. It was cluttered with police reports and computer printouts. He scattered a few of the papers and held one out. I hope this helps, he said. It just came in. Nancy took the paper from him. Everett, Frank, and Bess leaned in and read over her shoulders. No record on Lori Adams, Nancy said, reading aloud. But here's something interesting about Stan Leeton. What is it, Nancy? Bess asked, leaning closer. It says that Stan Leeton was in prison for robbing the Comstock Bacon Trust, Nancy said, her voice trembling with excitement. Was? Frank asked, looking down at her. Nancy met his glance. He was paroled. This afternoon. He's out now. End of chapter 19. Face itching, hungry mystery girl. Bess knew it after she was blatantly told the information. But oh, you're probably already gone, Coley, because you just went live, but I will see you soon. If she's the rightful heir, why'd she put a bid on it? I don't know. Maybe she's stupid. Yeah, that's probably the answer. Stay tuned for Danger Music is so nostalgic for me. Hang on, my mom texted me. I'm gonna text her back real quick. Okay. Chapter 20. Joe Hardy felt a dull throbbing in his temples and gingerly opened one eye. A bank of tiny green lights glowed in the air in front of him, casting a dull illumination. He tried to call out, but couldn't. His mouth seemed to be covered with tape of some sort. A gag? As his eyes adjusted, he realized where he was. The electrical closet. Knocked out. Kate. Kate? Joe scanned the dim cubicle. A still dark form lay on the floor beside him. For a second he feared the worst, but then he heard her breathing. She was all right, just out cold. Under him, Joe felt the rocking movement of the train. Wincing at the effort, he pulled himself up from a lying position on the floor. His legs were tied together tightly at the ankles, leaving him unable to move. He twisted his head around to see that the same strong cord bound his wrists behind his back. A glance at Kate told him she was firmly tied up too. The memory of finding her came back to Joe. Who had knocked him cold and tied him up and left him there? Besides the train crew, he had only seen Jack Lerner on the train. Joe frowned, puzzled. Did that mean Jack had knocked him out? It made no sense. Joe wished his head didn't hurt so much. It would be much easier to think if his brain wasn't throbbing so. First things first. Inching over to the electrical panel, Joe scraped his cheek along the row of switches, trying to peel off the wide strip of duct tape that covered his mouth. A protruding metal corner scratched him and he groaned softly. Oh well, no pain, no gain. It took a few minutes, but at last Joe managed to snag the silver tape on the sharp piece of metal. He slowly pulled away, stoically ignoring the feeling that the tape was peeling off the top layer of his skin. At last his mouth was free. He flexed his jaw, grimacing. Next to him, Kate moaned softly. Kate? Joe whispered. It's me, Joe. I'm here with you. She sounded agitated. Lie still for a second. I'm going to try to peel off your gag with my teeth. Maneuvering himself to his knees, he bent down and nuzzled her soft cheek with his mouth. He could feel himself blushing violently in the dark. I'm sorry about this, he muttered. Luckily for him, it was pretty easy to catch the corner of the piece of tape in his teeth. Joe clenched his teeth and reared back. The tape peeled off with a ripping sound, and he heard Kate's muffled squeak of pain. Sorry, he apologized again. Some hero he was turning out to be. Joe, is that really you? Came Kate's voice. How did you get here? I found you, Joe explained, but as soon as I did, I was knocked out cold. Jack, Kate whispered. So it was him, Joe cried in a hoarse voice. He's the one who did all of this? Joe could see the glimmer of Kate's eyes as she nodded. He wriggled into a more comfortable position. Start at the beginning. He asked Kate, tell me everything. What happened? What is Jack up to? Is Lori in on it too? Did anyone hurt you? Have you been here the whole time? Kate gave a groggy laugh. Could I answer one question at a time? Joe laughed back. Sorry, take your time. It's just that I've We've all really been worried about you. He rushed on before she could think he was getting sentimental. Just start with what happened after we came back from the trip to Emerald. Kate struggled to a sitting position, then leaned back against the wall next to him. After I left you, she said, I was heading back to my compartment when I passed by Jack and Lori's suite. The door was open a little and they were discussing something. What were they talking about? Joe asked. Can you remember? Kate nodded. Jack was telling Lori that they should have cut him in on it. Who? Joe wanted to know. On what? I don't know. Kate sounded distressed. All I know is Jack said we should have cut him in on it. And then they saw you? Joe asked. They realized you'd heard them? Right, Kate confirmed. Jack looked up and saw me in the hall. He knew I'd heard him. I denied it, but he didn't believe me. Then what happened? Joe urged. They kept me locked in their suite at first while they decided what to do with me. I was so scared, Kate confessed, her voice trembling. I tried to explain I had no idea what they'd been talking about, that I wouldn't tell anyone, but Jack told Lori it was too risky to let me go. Poor Kate, she'd been through an awful experience. Okay, take it easy, Joe urged softly. Finally, Kate started speaking again, her voice no more than a whisper. They moved me to an empty suite and kept me locked up there for, I don't even know how long. That's where I found your pin, Joe exclaimed, the suite for the handicapped down the hall from Jack and Lori's. I hoped someone would find it, Kate told him. It fell off, so I worked it down into the bedclothes. I was so glad they didn't find it when they made up the bed and moved me again. It was a lucky break, Joe admitted. When I found that pin, I knew you were still on the train. Where'd they take you next? Here, Kate said, glancing up at the wall full of electrical wiring. It's been so spooky. Lori brings me food and takes me to the bathroom in the middle of the night when no one's around. I guess they'll be doing that with you too, she added, sounding rueful. They never explained why they were holding you prisoner? Joe asked. Kate's only answer was a shrug. Joe peered around the tiny room. The first thing we have to do is get out of here, then we can find out what Jack and Lori are up to. How? Kate asked. We're both tied up and the door's probably locked from the outside. Hey, Joe said, trying to sound lighthearted and optimistic. I specialize in getting out of tight spots. He edged toward Kate, his back to her. There's a pocket knife in my back pocket, he said. If you turn around so that we're back to back, do you think you can move your hand enough to pull it out? Kate squirmed around. Soon she had her back to Joe's. I think so, she said. Joe felt Kate's hands moving along his waist. Soon her fingers were at his back pocket. Can you get it? He asked. Kate grunted. Move a little to your right? Joe did and felt Kate's hand reach into his pocket. I got it, she cried. Now what? Now we saw our way out of these ropes, Joe told her over his shoulder. You've got to be kidding, Kate said. That'll take forever. Hey, Joe said, I don't have to be anywhere, do you? I hope this is okay, Frank said as Nancy opened her compartment door. He held out... He held out a tray of sandwiches. The selection wasn't great. Nancy closed the door behind him. Did you see Jack or Lori? She wanted to know. Frank nodded. I told them Connie wanted to see them in half an hour in his compartment. They're going to meet you there, he told Everett. Good, Nancy said. Did they ask why? Frank unwrapped a sandwich. I told them that Connie was furiously working on a solution as to where the diamond was hidden. Bess giggled. I can't wait to be there when they walk into our trap. Nancy held out her hand and Frank passed her a sandwich. It's not really a trap, Bess. Frank and I just want to know that they're somewhere else when we break into their compartment. Frank sat down next to Everett. Ready to spin them some yarns about the case? He asked. Sure, yarns are my business, Everett told Frank. I'll keep them there all night. Just keep them busy for a half hour or so, Nancy said, smiling. Long enough so that we can find out exactly what they're up to. And how Stan Leeton fits in, Frank added. I can't believe it's just a coincidence that this trip has happened at the same time as his parole. I agree. You know, Nancy said, picking at the stale bread of her sandwich, they're probably involved in some sort of race to find the diamond. I was just thinking about how hard Jack and Lori fought to keep this trip going and to keep it on schedule. Maybe Lori was so set on this trip because she knew her cousin would be free in a few days, and she didn't have much time to find the stone on her own. Hey, Connie Everett jumped up. This time I've really solved the mystery, he announced. I know who stole the Comstock diamond. End of chapter 20. It's not nostalgic for me. I never played it. Yet. That's okay, Joe. My brain hurts too when I try to think. Same. Baby, I swear I was trying to remove your tape. Wow, I was not expecting these sort of like spicy moments. Golden Potato Wee! Thank you for the follow. Welcome to the channel. I hope you're doing well today. Oh no, Joe, I swear I was reaching for your knife. I know. Oh no, it's totally fine. Don't worry about it. I'm glad that you're here. Welcome, welcome. I still have 2 more chapters to read. I always take a break between chapters to kind of catch up on the chat and things. So you're good to go. I just heard the alert go off, which is why I looked up, but yeah, whew, got a little toasty in here from that last chapter. Oh, family friendly. Okay. 2 more or is it 2 more chapters or 3? 3 more chapters. Okay, here we go. But there's not many pages left, so they'll probably be pretty quick. Okay. Chapter 21. Again? Bess demanded, looking skeptical. I hope this guess is better than the last one. Oh, ye of little faith, Connie chided her. He looked excited and pleased with himself. This time I know I'm right. Okay, so let us in on it, Nancy said eagerly. Connie spread out his hands. What could be simpler? It had to be Stan Leeton. Huh? Bess looked mystified. See, if Nancy's right about Lori being in a rush to find the diamond before Stan got out of prison, Everett explained, that must mean Stan knows how to get his hands on it. And why would he know that? Because he was the one who hid it in the first place. I'll bet you're right. Good thinking, Connie. Nancy complimented him. He beamed. Okay, so let me see if I understand this, Bess said slowly. Stan Leeton stole the Comstock diamond from Brixton's auction house 15 years ago. Then he went on a trip that retraced the path of his ancestor, Jake Comstock. We think he was looking for a gold mine or the claim to a gold mine. He ended up in San Francisco where he robbed a bank, got arrested, and went to jail for 14 years. She shook her head. That's just too weird. It does raise a couple of questions, Frank agreed. Like, why steal the Comstock diamond? Sarah Finney says it's not that valuable as just a diamond. It's valuable because of its history. You couldn't get that much for it on the black market because you'd have to sell it without telling anyone what it really was. So why go to all the trouble of such daring theft? One thing is certain, Nancy said. Lori Adams wants that diamond. She's got Brixton's to put up a reward for its return. Why? Well, it's worth something, Beth said. But it'll be returned to the auction house, Everett pointed out. Lori won't even be able to keep it. Bess clutched her temples. Oh, my head is spinning, she groaned. If both cousins want the diamond so badly, there must be something special about it, Frank muttered. Then he snapped his fingers. Hey, maybe that's a piece of the puzzle, he suggested. Nancy stared at him. What do you mean? She asked. What kind of puzzle? Frank waved his hands in the air. I don't know exactly, he said, but it is cut in an unusual shape. A pyramidal prism. Maybe that's supposed to mean something? Like what? That Jake Comstock's mother lode is located in King Tut's tomb? Connie asked, snorting. Frank slumped back into his seat, frowning. Okay, it is kind of far out, he admitted. Nancy checked her watch. It's time to get moving, she said. I just wish we knew a little more. I feel like we're so close to a solution. Not that close. We still haven't figured out who that guy is that's sabotaging the train, Frank reminded her. Or where Joe and Kate are. We may be closer than you think, Nancy said. I think Jack did recognize the saboteur when the guy attacked him in Chicago. He wouldn't admit it because he didn't want to have to explain why the guy was attacking him. So I think it's pretty safe to assume that the saboteur is also part of the Stan Leeton Lori Adams thing. I'm hoping we'll find some clues in Jack and Lori's compartment. Well then, what are we waiting for? Frank opened the door to Nancy and Bess's compartment. We're pulling into San Francisco in less than 20 minutes, he said to Everett and Bess. Go do your stuff, and whatever you do, do not let Jack and Lori get off this train. Good luck, Everett said as he and Bess took off down the hall. Be careful, Nancy said quietly. Frank put an arm around Nancy's shoulder and led the way down the hall in the opposite direction. Don't worry about them, he said. They will be fine. Within a few minutes, Nancy and Frank were at Jack and Lori's compartment. Frank tried the door. It was locked, but Nancy reached in her pocket and silently handed him her lock-picking tools. That's what I like about you, Frank said, smiling at her. You are always prepared. As Frank turned the doorknob and pushed the door open, he felt the train slow down. He looked at Nancy, alarmed. We must be coming into San Francisco early. Hurry! Frank stepped over to the pull-down table to check out a stack of papers. On top was a schedule of the trip. Underneath that, he found the map that had been stolen from Nancy's compartment. Nancy was at his side, also going through the papers. She frowned anxiously. "I don't see anything that looks like a will," she fretted. "Maybe they hid it," Frank suggested. "Check their suitcases, why don't you?" Nancy nodded and went to the closet. Frank returned to sorting through the papers. The train was moving slower now. Then it came to a halt. Out the window, Frank could see the station. Quickly, he ran his fingers through the pile. At the bottom, he found a big manila envelope. Inside was an ancient-looking piece of paper. At the top, in fancy old script, it read, "This claim," in large capital letters. An old hand-drawn contour map was paperclipped to it. "Check this out," he said, showing the contents of the envelope to Nancy. "That might be what I saw," Nancy commented. "It was partly buried under some other papers. It looks like the deed to a mine." Frank looked it over. It announced that whoever held the claim could take ownership of a mining stake found by Jake Comstock in the year 1852 in the Colorado Territory. "It is the claim to the Motherlode," Frank nearly shouted. "So Lori has it. I don't get this. Why is she chasing after the diamond when she has this claim?" Nancy was peering into the envelope. She reached in and pulled out a yellowed slip of paper that had been caught in the crease at the bottom. She cast her eyes over it, then sucked in her breath sharply. "Frank," she said, holding it out. It was a brief letter written in a spindly script. "Read this." Frank took it. "To Louise and Alfred," he read. "Jake's grandchildren, if I remember the family tree correctly," Nancy put in. Frank nodded and read on. "Here's the claim to the mining stake I once told you about. I'm leaving it to you as I know you are brave and adventurous children. I have devised a game for you. The stakes are high, so play wisely. As you will note, on the attached map, there seems to be no mark to show exactly where my claim lies." Breaking off, Frank flipped to the map. "It's true there is no mark," he commented. "Just some strange-looking contour lines." "Read the last bit," Nancy urged him. "This is no error," Frank read. "In fact, there is a mark, but you will find it only if you know how to look. The one who has my good luck will be the one who finds the gold." The letter ended abruptly there. It was signed J. Comstock. J. Comstock. Frank stared at Nancy. "His good luck, does he mean that diamond?" he asked. Nancy's eyes gleamed with excitement. "What else? But the diamond was lost right after Jake died, and it wasn't found until nearly 15 years ago," she said. Frank stared at Nancy. "So I was right," he said slowly. "The diamond is a part of the puzzle. That's why Jake had cut it into such an odd shape. It must be a prism." "I think so," Nancy said, nodding. "I'll bet that if you place it at just the right spot on this map, it'll bend the contour lines into some kind of mark that shows where the Motherlode is." "Wow," Frank said. "That's why Lori wants the diamond so badly." "She had the claim," Nancy said, pointing to the paper in Frank's hand. "But she couldn't find the map. Or she couldn't find the mine until she had the key to the map." Frank dropped the paper and sat down on the nearby seat. "That explains a lot," he said. "Why she organized this trip, why she never admitted her connection to Jake Comstock. This was not just a fun trip to solve an old crime. For her and Jack, this could lead to millions." "Stan Leighton must know about this too," Nancy said, thinking aloud. "And that's why he sold the diamond in the first place." "Two cousins each trying to get sole possession of Jake's Motherlode. They must be greedy people," Frank said. "If only they had been willing to share, they could have had the money ages ago." He thought for a moment. "So what do we do now? We still don't know that what Jake and Lori are up to is illegal. Devious, yes, but not illegal." "Frank?" Nancy cried, staring past him and out the window of Jack and Lori's compartment. "Look!" She pointed out the window. Frank turned in his seat and pressed his face against the window. In a flash, he saw what had gotten Nancy's attention. Jack Lerner and Lori Adams were standing outside on the train platform looking right at Nancy and Frank. End of chapter 21. Welcome for joining, yes. That's what I like about you. You're always prepared to break into places. Hi, Socks and Punchy. I'm a little bit cold. I'm afraid to put a jacket on, though, and then get hot. What do I do? I think I'm just gonna be cold. Ba, 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 ba. Okay. Let's just press. Chapter 22. As soon as Jack spotted Nancy and Frank, he grabbed Lori's arm and yanked her down the platform. Frank grabbed Nancy's hand. "Hurry, we can't lose them now." Nancy snatched up the copy of the claim. "I don't want this to get out of our hands," she explained. She followed Frank into the hallway. When she looked to the right, she saw Bess and Connie Everett running toward them. "You guys!" Bess yelled. "Jack and Lori got away. We tried to stop them, but they knew it was a setup." Everett was standing next to her now. "I tried to stall them. I told them I thought the mastermind angle wasn't dead. I was in the middle of giving them my explanation when Jack turned to Lori and told her that they were wasting their time." "Jack's weird, Nancy," Bess said. "It was like..." Before Bess could go on, Frank interrupted her. "Tell us later," he ordered. "Right now we have to follow Jack and Lori. Let's go." Frank raced toward the exit with Nancy, Bess, and Everett following close behind. Just as they were getting off the train, Nancy heard a voice calling her name. She turned around. It was Joe Hardy. "Nancy! Frank!" he called out. He and Kate Harkins were running toward them. "Hold it, where are you going?" "I can't believe it," Frank said. "Where have you been?" Joe cracked a smile. "It's a long story. Where are you guys off to in such a hurry?" "We'll fill you in on the way," Frank said, pulling on his brother's arm. "Come on, we need you." Nancy had raced down the platform and into the station, keeping her eyes peeled for any sign of Jack and Lori. Then she found them. In one corner, a crowd had gathered and Jack was in the center of it. He had squared off with a short man, the saboteur. "There they are!" Nancy cried out. She darted in and out among waiting passengers and headed for the crowd. Jack looked up and met Nancy's eyes. He didn't pause. He only grabbed Lori's hand and the two of them raced for the station exit, leaving the saboteur with his fists clenched. Frank and Joe were at Nancy's side now. She pointed at the retreating figure of the saboteur. "Look!" Frank shifted into action and started after the guy, Joe right behind him. Bess, Everett, and Kate ran up to them. "Go ahead!" Bess panted. Nancy followed Joe and Frank out of the station. She spotted Jack and Lori trying to get into a cab. The saboteur was trying to pull Jack out, but the train organizer managed to slam the door on him. As soon as the saboteur saw Frank and Nancy, he took off at a run. "What should we do? Follow him or follow Jack and Lori?" Frank hailed a cab. "We cannot let Jack and Lori get away. They're up to something big." A taxi pulled up in front of them and Frank ducked inside. Nancy and Joe jumped in after him and Joe pulled the door shut behind them. "Follow that cab," he said to the driver. He pointed to the taxi that Jack and Lori had taken and was now pulling out into traffic. "No problem," the driver said cheerfully. The cab's tires squealed as the driver swerved around a parked car and pulled out of the station. Nancy peered through the rear window to see Bess, Kate, and Everett hailing another cab. "They're coming," she said to Frank and Joe. "The question is, where are we going?" Frank wondered as the cab left the station and merged into traffic. "Looks like we're headed for San Francisco," the cab driver said. "This is the freeway that goes to the Bay Bridge." "We're not in San Francisco?" Nancy asked. "Nope," the driver confirmed. "The train stops in Oakland." Dusk was settling over in San Francisco as Nancy, Frank, and Joe cruised over the Bay Bridge. The cab driver was doing a good job of keeping up with Jack and Lori's cab. "This is going to be some fare," he said over his shoulder as they got off the bridge. "I hope you kids are good for it." "Don't worry," Nancy said. She turned to Joe. "What happened to you?" she asked. "I found Kate, but Jack Lerner got me," he explained. "Jack and Lori are the ones who kidnapped Kate. She heard them saying something about how they should have cut some guy in on it, and they nabbed her. Kept her locked up this whole time." Frank let out a low whistle. "Who's the guy?" "I'll bet they meant the saboteur," Nancy guessed. "He wanted in on their scam, but they wouldn't go for it. That must be what he and Jack fought about back in Chicago." "What scam?" Joe wanted to know. Frank filled Joe in on what he and Nancy had discovered in Jack and Lori's compartment. He pulled Jake Comstock's claim out of its envelope and showed it to Joe. Nancy saw a look of recognition pass over Joe's face. "Yeah," he said. "I saw this in their compartment when I found the original of Macklin's map." "The map?" Nancy asked. "Did they take it from my compartment?" "I guess so," Joe acknowledged. "Right before Jack nabbed me, I was in his compartment. That's when I spotted the map. Jack said it had turned up, shoved under their door, but he didn't have time to tell you before you left the train at Kearns. I thought that sounded pretty lame." "Do you think they're leading us to the diamond?" Frank asked, staring ahead through the windshield. They were following Jack and Lori through the hilly streets of San Francisco now. "Either that or to Stan Leeton," Nancy said, nervously biting on her finger. "Or both." "You want to fill me in on who Stan Leeton is?" Joe asked. Nancy told him. "And he may have been the one who stole the diamond from Brixton's," she concluded. "So Lori's looking for him because he knows where the diamond is?" Joe asked. "That's what we think," Frank agreed. Jack and Lori's cab made a hard right turn. Nancy and the Hardys' cab squealed as it followed. "They're taking the bridge," the driver informed them, sounding mildly puzzled. "Boy, these people sure are taking the scenic route." Nancy saw they were headed for the entrance to the Golden Gate Bridge, which would lead them out of San Francisco again. A solid bank of fog was rolling across the bridge to meet them. "This is some ride," Joe commented. As soon as they crossed the bay, Jack and Lori's cab took the first turnoff and screeched to a halt in a small parking lot. Nancy saw Jack race from the cab with Lori close behind. "Come on," Nancy shouted to Frank and Joe, quickly handing their driver some money. Jack was climbing a steep hillside that went up from the parking lot. Lori stumbled behind him. Nancy followed suit, making her way up on hands and knees when it got really steep. When she got to the top, Nancy saw they were on a bluff overlooking the fog-shrouded bay. Nancy darted back and forth, searching for any sign of Jack and Lori. She was having trouble seeing it in the growing darkness, though. To make matters worse, the thick white fog was steadily creeping up the hillside. "Over there," Frank said, pointing toward the edge of the bluff. Jack Lerner was crouched down, digging with his hands in the ground at the base of an old oak tree. Lori was kneeling beside him. As Nancy looked, a tendril of fog floated across her line of vision. Frank raced toward Jack with Joe and Nancy close behind. When they were about 10 feet away, Jack rose to his feet. His eyes glittered with triumph, and in his hands he held a small mud-covered box. "It's ours," he said to Lori. "You were right." He looked at Nancy and the Hardys and laughed. "And there isn't a thing you can do about it," he told them. Frank paused, unsure of how to proceed. "What should we do with them?" he called to Nancy. Before Nancy could answer, a rasping male voice came out of the foggy darkness. "You can leave them to me. I know what to do with it," he suggested. "Stan?" Lori gasped. "Stan Leighton?" Nancy guessed. Her heart sank. She had a bad feeling about this meeting. "None other," the voice said. A heavy-set, balding man in a cheap-looking suit stepped out of the mist, a gun in his hand. The saboteur from the train was close behind him, also holding a gun. He tipped an imaginary hat at Nancy and the Hardys. "We meet again," he said. Stan Leighton's accomplice, of course, Nancy realized, but she hardly had time to think about that just then. Stan Leighton was still pointing his gun right at Lori. "Hand over the diamond and the claim, Lori," he said, "or else I'll be forced to shoot you." End of chapter 22. Oh yeah, Zeus jumped up while I was reading that chapter. He's actually my sister's dog. My sister's been staying with us for a little while her house gets built. "Go ahead and shoot!" Yeah, that's the confidence we want from Lori. Okay, last chapter. We ready? Yeah, Sarah might stream with me at some point before she goes back. Chapter 23. Jack took a step forward, then froze as the gun barrel swung toward him. "Don't even think about it, Stan," he said through his teeth. "Oh, so you have the diamond," Stan said, catching sight of the box. "Kamita, get it from him," he ordered the saboteur. Kamita stepped forward and took the box from Jack's hands. Joe inched closer to his brother. "It's 2 on 5, he whispered to Frank. "I think we could take them." Frank gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. He was not ready to take the risk just yet. He wanted to see what the choices were. They were all in a semicircle now, with Stan and Kamita holding their guns on them. "What's this about a claim?" Frank asked Stan. Leighton glared at Frank. "Keep quiet," he warned. "This is between Lori and me." He squared off with Jack. "You guys were stupid to double-cross me like that." "Who double-crossed who?" Lori cried. "You're the one who took off with the diamond." Frank poked Joe in the side with his elbow. "So he is the thief," he said softly. Nancy leaned in toward Frank. "What'd you do with the claim?" she whispered. "It's tucked inside my shirt," Frank whispered back. He gave her a curious look. She had a plan, he could tell. Nancy cleared her throat. "Maybe I could help," she said to Stan. "Since you've got the diamond, you'll be needing the claim, won't you?" Stan looked at Nancy as if she were an insect. "What's it to you?" he asked suspiciously. "Well, I could tell you where it is, that's all," she answered levelly. Lori gasped. "You wouldn't," she said. "So that's how it is." A slow grin spread across Stan's face. "And what might you want in return, young lady?" Nancy shrugged. "Not much. A few $100,000 and some answers." Stan guffawed. "I like that. Healthy greed and healthy curiosity. What you want to know?" Kamita's eyes narrowed and he shifted his feet. "I don't like this, Leighton," he complained. "We're wasting time here. We can find the claim. Let's just take care of these people and split." Stan shook his head. "There's no hurry. Let's satisfy these kids' curiosity," he said sarcastically. "It's no skin off my nose." Jack lunged for Stan, but Lori held him back. don't, she begged. Let me help you out, Frank began. Lori's your cousin. Stan nodded. That's right, we've been told the story about the diamond and the mining claim since we were kids. When the diamond turned up at Brixton, Lori had the idea to steal it and then go hunt for the claim. He bared his teeth at Lori. I didn't find out until it was too late. And that she was planning to double-cross me. She had already found the claim. She had it all along. You're the one who took off on his own looking for the claim. Lori spit out the words. Would you have cut me in if you'd found it? Did Lori help you steal the diamond? Lori asked. Nancy asked. Lori turned on Nancy. Why, the nerve! What kind of person do you think I am? Kamita let out a booming laugh. Of course she did. She and Leighton were like that, he said, holding up 2 crossed fingers. Or so Leighton thought. He added. Actually, she just wanted him to do the dirty work for her. Shut up, Stan warned him, scowling. I've changed my mind, he added, turning to Nancy. I don't feel like talking about this. He leveled the gun at her. Tell me where the claim is, he ordered. I might let you live if you do. Nancy! Suddenly Bess's voice rang out in the mist. Where are you? Kamita turned around, and Stan gave a tiny start. That was all the advantage the Hardys needed. Frank shot out his leg, sending Stan sprawling to the ground. His gun sailed out of his hand. Frank was on him in a second. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Joe take Kamita in a flying tackle and noticed 2 things skip-leap out of Kamita's hand and over the edge of the bluff. The diamond, Joe knew, was now at the bottom of the bay, along with Kamita's gun. Nancy, Lori! Frank cried, looking behind his shoulder as he wrestled with Stan. She's getting away! Frank had Stan pinned to the ground now and watched as Nancy gave Lori a sharp neck chop. The older woman sank to the ground, out cold. Next, Nancy went after Jack. By now, Joe had managed to knock Kamita to his knees. He sent a blow to the man's head that put the saboteur out like a light. As soon as Joe saw that Kamita was out, he ran to help Nancy with Jack. As Nancy and Joe raced down the hill, they could hear Jack stumbling through the mist ahead of them. Suddenly, there was a solid thump. Ooh! Came Connie Everett's voice. A second later, Nancy and Joe nearly tripped over him. He was sprawling on the ground, his legs tangled up with Jack Lerner's. They must have collided. Bess and Kate were standing a few feet away, unsure of what to do. Let me up, you buffoon! Jack said furiously. Nice work, Connie, Nancy gasped. Joe threw himself on top of Jack and pinned him to the ground. Then he fished some bits of rope out of his pants pocket. This is for what you did to me and Kate, he said, and began to tie Jack's arms tightly behind him. As soon as Jack was securely bound, the group led him back up the hill. Frank was waiting there, perched on top of Stan Leighton's unconscious frame. Lori and Kamita lay nearby. Connie spotted Stan's gun and picked it up. I always wanted to round up the bad guys this way, he said with a grin. He turned to the culprits who were groaning and stirring now. Okay, he barked, let's get a move on. You tell him, Connie, Bess cheered. Nancy, Frank, and Joe looked at one another, grinning in silent congratulation. It was over. Jake Comstock's legacy had come to an end. His gold mine would remain hidden unless someone accidentally stumbled upon it. Later that night, the group gathered for dinner in a banquet room at a restaurant along Fisherman's Wharf. Jack, Lori, Kamita, and Stan were safely in jail. Sarah Finney was beaming at the head of Nancy's table. Next to her, Connie Everett was pulling the claws off a lobster, and on the other side of him, Frank and Joe talked together in hushed tones. Paul Fox sat next to Kate, looking subdued. Earlier, he had apologized to Joe for trying to pin Kate's disappearance on him. It's hard to believe Lori was in on the theft from the beginning, Bess said as she dipped a shrimp into lobster sauce. Nancy picked up another shrimp and munched on it slowly. She knew her bid would be too low. Stealing the diamond was the only way to get it. But she didn't want to do it herself, Frank pointed out. He took a sip of his soda. So she convinced Stan to do it, and then he took off with the diamond, Joe said, shaking his head. I guess he thought that if Lori didn't have the claim, he might be able to find it by doing research on Jake Comstock. That's what he was looking for the whole time. He never meant to hide the diamond. Lori didn't know that for sure, though, Everett pointed out, wiping his hands on a napkin. She had to check the whole route. I take back what I said about Macklin, he added with a laugh. The map wasn't even his work. Lori was the one who put it all together. It was all just part of her hoax. Is that why she stole the map? Bess wanted to know. Nancy nodded. I guess she didn't want us to suspect that it was a fake. She must have heard Connie asking to look at it. She thought he might recognize that the scribbles weren't Macklin's writing. And I would have, too, Everett boasted. I think, he added quietly. I can't believe Lori was looking for the diamond for the past 15 years, Joe said, shaking his head. I'm sure it was a brilliant idea of her to... It sure was a brilliant idea of her to organize this trip and use all of us to help her find it. Kate reached out to squeeze Joe's hand. The two locked gazes until Bess's voice broke the spell. Well, how did this saboteur fit in? She asked. Frank cleared his throat. Apparently, Ron Comita knew Stan Leighton in jail. That's how he learned that Stan had stolen the Comstock diamond. Stan told Comita he had stashed the diamond somewhere until he could get his hands on the mining claim. When Comita got out of jail, he went to Jack and Lori and told them about it. He wanted to be cut in on the deal, but they refused. So Comita went back to Stan, Nancy explained, and Stan told him he would cut Comita in on the deal if he delayed Jack and Lori's trip long enough for Stan to retrieve the diamond before anyone else found it. Everett took a sip from his water glass. What I don't understand is how Lori figured out where the diamond was. She hadn't known for 15 years. Apparently, that spot was a place where Lori and Stan used to play when they were little. They had buried a pet dog there years ago. After looking every conceivable place, Lori figured that Stan could have hidden the diamond there. She didn't know for sure, but it was a good last guess. Hey, let's not forget the fact that it's right by the Golden Gate Bridge, Frank quipped. Bess reached over to give him a mock punch on the arm. I'm sorry this case is over, she said with a laugh, but I am not going to miss your lousy jokes, Frank Hardy. I'm just sorry we were all used, Sarah said sadly. If only I had known, she added. Hey, Everett said, pursing his lips. Don't be sorry. The adventure we had makes it all worthwhile, believe me. Nancy laughed out loud. So what are you going to do next? She asked him. Write a mystery, Everett said. About what? Bess wanted to know. A wide grin appeared across Everett's face. A miner, of course, he said, whose name happens to be Jake Comstock. End of book. Judo chop. I know, I'm sorry for laughing, but this mental image of Nancy being like, ha-cha! Ha-cha-cha! To Lori's neck was like ridiculous to me. Like now I'd like to imagine Train with Nancy jumping out of the minecart and judo chopping the culprit in the neck instead of the culprit just falling into the mud and giving up. Yeah. Yeah, Frank should leave the puns to Joe. Yay, thank you for the claps. We finished the book. This will go up on YouTube in 3 days. I am very glad to be streaming again in the morning. Thank you so much for all being here. What I definitely want to do is go raid Coley. So I'm gonna go do that. She is villager hunting. But we are gonna go raid her. Thank you again for the follow, Golden Potato Wee. I hope that you come back and see us again soon and hang out with us more in the future. But thank you for being here and thank you for the follow. You're welcome for the stream. You're welcome. I'm going to go ahead. If you would like to raid with me, you can use this raid message. I'm going to go ahead and set up... why can I not type? Raid Coley's Corner. Alright, everybody, take care of yourselves. I'm going to try again to stream tomorrow morning, so hopefully I'll see you there. But if I don't, I laughed because I followed near the spicy part. I was like, nice. Exactly. Take care of yourselves, everybody. I hopefully will see you tomorrow morning. And until then, much love. Bye-bye.